I don't care what you think, this property was legally sold.
Title 50, Section 3951 of the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act says otherwise. This sale is invalid.
She thought she had already won. The land was sold, the papers were signed, the deal was done. But what she didn't realize was...
The message hit my phone at 2:13 a.m., the kind of hour where nothing good ever shows up. I stared at the screen under a red headlamp inside a canvas tent, listening to distant generators and the low murmur of radios outside. Final notice: property sold at HOA auction. Call immediately. For a second, I honestly thought it was some scammer trying to scare me. But then I saw the sender, my neighbor, Denise, a woman who never texted late, never exaggerated, never messed around. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like the ground moved. Because I wasn't just away for work, I was deployed, in uniform, serving, and according to that message, while I was gone. My homeowners association had sold my land as if I didn't exist. My name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed. At the time this happened, I'd been in the Army nearly 11 years. I'd spent birthdays in airports, anniversaries on field exercises, and more holidays than I can count staring at beige walls in places that didn't feel real, but the land did. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a lake house. It was a simple piece of property in a quiet, planned community outside. Fayetteville, 2 acres at the edge of a neighborhood that had been carved out of old pine forest. I bought it because I wanted something that couldn't be taken from me by surprise. Something permanent. A foundation for the life my wife Talia and I kept postponing. A home, a garden, a place where time would finally slow down. When we bought the lot, the HOA sounded harmless. The brochure was glossy, full of smiling families and clean sidewalks. The agent said the rules were standard. Keep the grass cut. Don't park rusted cars in the driveway. Follow basic design guidelines. The dues weren't bad either. About $60 a month. The HOA said it covered landscaping at the entrance, streetlights, a little community pond with a fountain that ran in the summer. I'd dealt with structure my whole adult life. I figured I could handle a few rules. What I didn't understand then was that an HOA isn't just a neighborhood club. It's a small government with big power, especially when it comes to liens, fees, and legal threats. The first problem began with a stack of pine straw. I'd hired a contractor to clear, brush and level part of the land so we could eventually build. After the work, there were a few piles left near the tree line, contained and far from the street. A week later, I got a letter. Violation, yard debris. There's a photo. Attached like I'd committed a crime. I called the HOA office and explained it was temporary and would be removed once the next phase started. The woman on the phone didn't care. She read from a script, voice flat as a concrete wall. You have 10 days to remedy before fines begin. 10 days later, I cleared it. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. It was the beginning. The HOA board had a certain personality. At the center of it was the HOA president, a man named Keith Harlan, mid-50s. Always wearing a polo shirt with the neighborhood logo stitched on the chest like a badge of authority. Keith liked rules. It's the way some people like sports, passionately and loudly. He walked the neighborhood with a clipboard. He took pictures. He posted long messages online about maintaining standards. To him, this community wasn't a place where people lived. It was a project, a thing to control, and my lot and built, partially wooded, different seemed to annoy him. The orders came in early spring. I was going overseas for 9 months. The kind of deployment where your calendar stops belonging to you. The kind where sleep comes in fragments and you learn to function on routine and grit. Talia and I sat at the kitchen table. Papers spread out, trying to plan like grown adults. Bills, mail, insurance, contingencies. Before I left, I did what I thought was smart. I set up automatic payments for every bill I could. I put a trusted family friend on limited power of attorney. I told the HOA by email and certified letter that I'd be deployed and provided an alternate mailing address. I even attached a copy of my orders. I thought that would protect us 3 weeks into deployment. Our local mail started acting strange. Talia told me letters arrived late or not at all. Some were returned to sender. The neighborhood mailbox cluster got vandalized one night, and several boxes were pried open, but I didn't panic. I figured worst case we'd miss a magazine subscription. Maybe a utility flyer. I didn't realize missing a single HOA letter could be like missing a court summons, because HOA communication isn't just reminders. It's how they build a paper trail, one that can end in a lien. The first thing the HOA did wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. They claimed my payments were late. That made no sense. My bank records showed the dues paid automatically. But then came the twist. The board had increased the dues, and the autopay amount didn't match the new total. The difference was small, about $12. $12 became a late fee. The late fee triggered an administrative fee. The administrative fee triggered an inspection fee. And then they charged for sending letters I never received by the time Talia called to ask what was happening. They told her the account is delinquent and in collections. Delinquent. Over $12. A lien is one of those words that feels like it belongs to rich people with complicated problems, but the HOA filed one against my land like it was routine. Like ordering office supplies. They didn't call me. They didn't email me. They didn't ask, hey, we see you're deployed, let's work this out. They sent notices to the address they knew I wasn't at. And then they used my failure to respond as justification to escalate. It was bureaucratic, cold, and perfectly designed to look legitimate from the outside. On paper, I was ignoring them. In reality, I was on the other side of the world, sleeping in gear. Doing my job. That's how I ended up staring at Denise's message at 2:13 a.m. I called her immediately. Stepping outside where the night air was cooler and the stars looked too sharp, like they'd been cut out of glass. Denise answered on the second ring, voice tense. Marcus, I didn't want to bother you, but they put a sign on your lot. It says it was sold. I went to the county website. There's a new owner listed. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. Denise, how? I'm deployed. I know, she said, softer. That's why I'm telling you. It feels wrong. Wrong didn't even cover it. It felt impossible. Talia answered, half asleep. And I hated myself for waking her. But when I told her what Denise said, she sat up so fast I could hear the sheets shift. That can't be right, she said. Then, in a voice I'll never forget, Marcus, I got another letter last week. It looked like a legal notice, but it was confusing. I thought it was just threatening language. My chest went tight. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to stress you out, she said, voice cracking. You're already over there. I thought we could handle it when you got back. I closed my eyes. This is what military life does. It trains you to compartmentalize, to delay feelings, to postpone problems until later. But the HOA didn't wait for later. The next morning I talked to my platoon leader. He didn't waste time. Reed, call legal assistance, Jag, immediately. I'd heard of the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act as SCRA, but only in broad strokes. It was something people mentioned in briefings, like a safety net you hoped you'd never need. Jag got me on a secure call and asked questions like a checklist. Were you on active duty? Yes. Did you receive proper notice? No. Was the action taken while you were deployed? Yes. Was it a foreclosure or a forced sale? It sounded like it. Then the attorney said the sentence that turned fear into focus. If they sold it without a court order while you were on active duty, that sale can be invalid. We need documents now. Jag explained it in plain English. Under the SCRA, there are protections against certain civil actions like foreclosure, while a service member is on active duty. The goal is simple. You shouldn't lose your home or property because you're serving and can't show up to defend yourself. An HOA can put pressure on letters and fees. But if it crosses into a forced sale without meeting legal requirements, it can violate federal law. And federal law doesn't care how confident your HOA president feels with a clipboard. Jag told me to gather everything: emails, dues records, my deployment orders, the certified letter receipting thing proving the HOA knew I was deployed. I had those records saved like a habit, for the first time since Denise's text. I felt like the ground under me wasn't collapsing. The worst part was being stuck. I couldn't just hop on a plane, walk into a courthouse and demand answers. My world was schedules and permissions and operational needs, so we worked through. Talia Jeg helped her draft a formal notice demanding documents, and another notice warning the HOA not to transfer or encumber the property any further. Talia sent it by certified mail, email, and even hand-delivered a copy to the management company office. The HOA's response came. 3 days later, it was one sentence. Your account was handled in accordance with the covenants. No explanation. No apology. No acknowledgement of my deployment. Just a smug, stamped refusal. A week later, Talia got copies of the lien and the sale notice from the county records office. The timeline made my hands shake. They claimed I was delinquent for months. They added fees that doubled and tripled the balance. They recorded a lien. They initiated a sale process. And then this part made my blood go cold. They listed a hearing date I'd never been told about. A legal proceeding where I hadn't appeared, because of course I hadn't. I was deployed. If I'd been there, I would have shown bank statements, orders, emails, everything. Instead, on paper, I was a no-show. A silent, irresponsible owner. The system had accepted the HOA's story. Denise called again. And what she said next turned this from messy to serious. I saw Keith, she whispered, like she was afraid someone might hear. He was showing your lot to someone before the sale. Like before it was official. Showing it how? I asked, walking it, pointing, talking about building. Like he already knew who was getting it. It smelled like insider dealing. Not necessarily criminal but deeply suspicious. An HOA board member is supposed to act in the community's interest, not line up private buyers like a middleman, I told Jag. The attorney's voice sharpened. If there's self-dealing or bad faith, that strengthens your position. Keep digging. The new owner wasn't a family. It wasn't a couple excited to build their first home. It was an LLC with a generic name. Stone Ridge Property Ventures, the kind of company that buys distressed properties in bulk, the kind that doesn't care about your story-only weather. The paperwork looks clean enough to profit. Talia called them and got a receptionist who sounded bored. We purchased the property legally, the receptionist said. If you have concerns, contact the HOA or your attorney. And she hung up. That was the moment we realized, even if we proved the HOA was wrong, we'd still have to untangle the sale itself. Because now, someone else claimed to own what I'd paid for. When I finally returned stateside months later, the reunion with Talia was everything you'd expect. Tight hugs, tears, the strange feeling of being home but not fully settled. But the first morning back, I drove straight to the lot. I expected to feel peace there, the way I used to. Instead, I saw fresh survey flags and a new sign. Future site, contact agent. Like I was a stranger trespassing on my own dream. I stood at the edge of the property and felt something hot behind my eyes. Not just anger, but insult, like being erased. I took photos of everything. Then I drove to the HOA office. The management office smelled like cheap air freshener and printer toner. The receptionist looked up. Can I help you? I'm Marcus Reed, I said. Lot 47. I was deployed. I'm here about the sale. Her smile froze. Like her face had hit a wall inside her head. 1 minute later, Keith Harlan stepped out from a back hallway, arms folded like he'd been waiting for this moment. Well, he said, dragging the word out, you're back. I stared at him. You sold my land while I was deployed. Eh? Keith's voice was smooth. You were delinquent. We followed procedure. Procedure, I repeated. Did your procedure include federal law? A flicker crossed his eyes, uncertainty or annoyance. I couldn't tell. He leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was giving advice. You should move on. It's done. That sentence made me calm in a way that scared even me, because if he wanted me to move on, it meant he believed I had no power here. He was wrong, Jag. Referred me to a civilian attorney who specialized in SCRA cases. Her name was Rachel Kim, and she didn't waste time with dramatic speeches. She read documents the way some people read threats carefully, and with precision. After an hour, she looked up and said, "They either didn't know what the SCRA requires, or they didn't care." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means this sale may be void," she said. "And if they knowingly proceeded despite your military status, they may face damages and attorney fees." I thought about Keith telling me to move on. My voice came out steady. "I don't want revenge. I want my property back." Rachel nodded. "Then we go get it." Rachel filed an emergency motion in court to prevent the buyer from developing, selling, or altering the property while the case was pending. In normal language, freeze everything. Because once a property changes hands again, it becomes harder to unwind. More parties, more lawyers, more delays. The judge granted a temporary order for the first time since the nightmare started. That future site sign came down. The lot sat quiet again, waiting like it had been holding its breath. Then came discovery. The legal process where each side has to turn over evidence, Rachel demanded. HOA account ledgers, proof of notices mailed, and deliveried meeting minutes where enforcement actions were. Approvadales involving my property contracts. With the HOA's collection attorney records of how the sale was conducted, the HOA's attorney pushed back at first, claiming requests were burdensome. Rachel didn't blink. "They took a service member's property," she said. "They can carry the burden." When the documents finally arrived, the story got uglier. Fees piled on in ways that didn't match the written rules. Dates didn't line up. Notices were generated but not clearly mailed. And the meeting minutes barely mentioned my case at all. It looked like they'd done something extreme, without proper oversight, or worse, without proper permission. The biggest turning point came from one email. An HOA management employee had forwarded my deployment. Notice the one with my orders attached to Keith and to board members. The subject line read, "Read active duty alternate address." Keith's reply was one sentence, "Proceed." He won't be here to fight it. When Rachel showed me that email, I felt cold from the inside out. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. I wore my dress uniform to court, not to make a show, but because I wanted the truth visible. I was exactly who the law was designed to protect. The HOA's attorney argued they followed standard procedure, that notices were mailed, that the sale was legal under state HOA statutes. Rachel stood and spoke calmly. "Federal law controls here," she said. "The Servicemembers Civil Relief Act restricts foreclosure actions during active military service without proper court protections." The HOA had actual knowledge of Sergeant Reed's deployment. We have their internal email confirming it. Then she handed the email to the bailiff. The judge read it. The room went so quiet I could hear someone's pen click. The judge looked up. "Mr. Harlan," he said, voice sharp, "is this genuine?" Keith's face tightened. I don't recall. You don't recall writing proceed?" the judge asked. Keith didn't answer. The judge didn't need him to stone. Ridge Property Ventures showed up with their own lawyer, claiming they were a good faith purchaser, meaning they bought the property believing everything was legal there. Attorney argued they shouldn't be punished for the HOA's actions. The judge acknowledged the point. But Rachel explained the reality. If the underlying sale violated federal protections, then the deed itself could be invalid. A buyer's good faith doesn't magically fix a broken process, especially when the law is designed to prevent exactly this kind of outcome. The judge ordered deeper review and set a longer hearing. In the meantime, the freeze on the property remained. Once the email surfaced, the HOA board fractured. One board member resigned immediately. Another claimed Keith acted alone. Keith claimed the management company handled everything. The management company blamed the collection attorney. The collection attorney said they were directed by the HOA. It was a circle of pointing fingers, all of them trying to escape the same truth. They went after a deployed service member's property because they thought I was too far away to stop them, and now they were. Realizing that assumption could cost them everything, something else happened that I didn't expect. Neighbors began reaching out. Some apologized for not telling Talia earlier. Others admitted they'd received aggressive letters to fines for trash bins, paint shades, minor landscaping. One, a retired couple told me they'd been hit with legal fees after disputing a $25 violation. A single mother said she was threatened with a lien over a broken fence panel after a storm. Everyone had a story. Most people just paid to make it stop, but my case, because it involved deployment, and federal protections made them look at the HOA differently. The board's power suddenly didn't feel normal. It felt dangerous. A month later, Rachel got an anonymous email, no name, no signature, just attachments. It contained internal notes from the HOA. Management office tracking accounts targeted for aggressive enforcement, including mine. One note said, owner absent, high likelihood of default, expedite. Another said, board wants an example made. I sat in Rachel's office reading those words, and it felt like someone had punched a hole in the wall of my life. Because it wasn't just about money, it was about control. They wanted to make an example out of someone who couldn't show up, and they picked the wrong person. At the next hearing, Rachel laid it out step by step. I paid dues via autopay. They raised dues without properly ensuring notice reached me. They charged escalating fees that exceeded reason. They had actual knowledge of my active duty status. They proceeded. Anyway, they sold the property. They tried to bury it under procedure. Then she turned to the judge and said, "This is not a paperwork error. This is deliberate." The judge's response was blunt. "I am deeply concerned," he said, "that the HOA acted with knowledge of military service and proceeded in a manner that undermines federal protections." He looked at the HOA's attorney. "I want a full accounting," he said, "and I want to know why this court should not void this sale." After court, Keith walked past me in the hallway, surrounded by papers and silence. He looked different now, smaller. Not physically, but spiritually. Like the confidence had leaked out of him, he muttered. "This is being blown out of proportion." Stepped in front of him, careful not to touch him. Careful not to give anyone a reason to twist the story. "You said I wouldn't be here to fight it," I said quietly. "I'm here." Keith's eyes darted away. For the first time, I didn't see authority in him. I saw fear, the ruling. Came a few weeks later. The judge found that the HOA's actions violated the protections applicable to active duty service members, and that the sale process could not stand. Under the circumstances presented in plain language, the sale was void. The deed was unwound. The property was returned to me. Stone Ridge was ordered to be made whole. Through the legal process, meaning they'd pursue the HOA and whoever else had caused the problem. Walked out of that courthouse with Talia beside me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt my shoulders drop. Not relief like it's over, relief like we survived. Getting the land back was only step one, then came the fallout. Rachel filed for attorney fees and damages, arguing the HOA's conduct wasn't just negligent, it was willful. The HOAs tried to settle quietly, offering to forgive fees and pay a small amount. If we signed a confidentiality agreement, Rachel asked me what I wanted. I thought about that email. Proceed. He won't be here to fight it. And I thought about the neighbors who'd been squeezed until they paid. No secrecy, I said. They don't get to hide this. So, we didn't settle. We let the case continue. HOAs often rely on insurance for legal trouble, but insurance companies read details like predators read weakness. Once the insurer saw evidence suggesting intentional misconduct, they reserved rights and then denied key parts of coverage. Meaning, the HOA couldn't count on insurance to save them. Now they had to pay lawyers out of HOA funds, and HOA funds come from dues, which meant that Neighbors, the very people Keith claimed to protect, were about to get stuck paying for his decisions. That's when the community truly turned. The next HOA meeting was packed. People stood along the walls. Some sat on the floor. A few filmed on their phones. Keith opened with a prepared statement about ongoing litigation. A man in the front row stood up. "How much is this costing us?" Keith dodged. "We can't discuss." Another voice. "Did you really say he wouldn't be here to fight it?" Keith's face reddened. "That email is being taken out of context." A woman near the back laughed sharp and bitter. "What context makes that okay?" Then someone yelled, "Resign." And the room erupted. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about years of intimidation. Finally hitting a wall. Within 2 months, Keith stepped down for personal reasons. 2 board members resigned. Management company ended its contract. Early, the HOA hired a new attorney who immediately advised damage control. But damage control can't undo what's already written in court records, and it can't erase the discovery documents. The case had exposed the HOA's internal behavior like sunlight through cracked blinds, and the community wasn't willing to pretend it was fine. Then came the letter every homeowner dreads. Special assessment on ODIC to cover legal expenses and potential judgments. The HOA proposed charging each homeowner thousands of dollars. People panicked. Some couldn't afford it. Some were furious. Some demanded to see every receipt. At the next meeting, an elderly man stood up and said, "I paid dues for 15 years. Now you're telling me I owe $3,000 because you bullied a soldier?" Nobody had an answer that didn't sound disgusting. Homeowners started talking about lawsuits against the HOA board members personally. More attorneys got involved, more bills piled up. The hole got deeper. Remember the buyer, Stone Ridge? They didn't just shrug and walk away. They sued the HOA to recover what they paid, plus costs and lost opportunity. And because the court had essentially said the sale shouldn't have happened, Stone Ridge had fuel for their claim. Now, the HOA wasn't dealing with one legal fight. They were dealing with multiple people. My case had been the spark, but the HOA's own actions turned it into a wildfire eventually. The HOA filed for bankruptcy protection. That sentence sounds dramatic, but it's basically a legal admission that the organization couldn't pay what it owed. It didn't mean the problem vanished. It meant the HOA's finances would be examined, debts sorted. The community would have to rebuild governance from the ashes of what the board had done in the neighborhood. It felt like someone had turned off the lights. Projects stopped. Vendors paused. Maintenance slowed. People argued about what would happen to the pond, the entrance landscaping, the streetlights, all because a board wanted to squeeze $12 into a catastrophian, decided a deployed soldier was an easy target. One evening, after all the court dates and paperwork, I went back to the lot alone. The sun was low, turning the tops of the pines gold. The air smelled like resin and warm dirt. I walked the property line slowly, listening. No signs, no flags, no future site billboard, just my land. I knelt and ran my hand through the grass, feeling something simple and human. Ownership, yes, but also safety. Talia and I didn't build immediately. We took a breath first. We let the adrenaline drain out. Then we started planning again, this time with a deeper understanding of how fragile normal life can be, and how quickly it can be threatened by people with paperwork and bad intentions. I'm telling you this story because it's not just about me. It's about what happens when small power goes unchecked. When rules turn into weapons. When someone thinks distance deployment, illness, grief, poverty makes you defenseless. If you're a service member, know this. Federal protections exist for a reason, and you're not asking for favors by using them. You're using the law the way it was designed. If you're a homeowner, understand your HOA's authority and your rights. Ask questions. Read notices. Keep records. And don't assume they wouldn't really go that far. Sometimes they do. They sold my land while I was deployed. And the only reason I got it back is because I refused to move anon because federal rights, good documentation, and the truth can still hit harder than a clipboard ever will.